Hello. Thank you guys so much for attending this awesome summit. And thank you, Apollo, for putting it on. It's pretty incredible. This is what makes the community so great, all this incredible support. So first, I just want to point out, that's my dog, Atari. He actually is that cute and that sweet looking. All right. So my name is Louise Fox. I'm an engineering manager at SurveyMonkey. I'm on the web platform team, which focuses on reimagining the front end at SurveyMonkey. As you can imagine, I'm a fan of GraphQL, Apollo, developer productivity, and even more so, I have a little special place in my heart for service workers. People say this picture is me and my natural element. Outside of working at SurveyMonkey, I like to build things, so I work on my house, and I've been living without normal power for about 2 years. I have two 15-amp circuits that power my whole house. One, of course, completely dedicated to the internet, so I guess that makes me a slight bit eccentric. How many of you guys have used SurveyMonkey to take a survey? All right, cool. How many of you guys have actually created a survey on SurveyMonkey? Okay, a little bit less, but still a few. Cool. Well, we actually have 16 million active users, and to this date, we've answered over 47 billion questions. So we have a lot of data around questions and a lot of good ways to answer them. So when I talk about SurveyMonkey and GraphQL, I have exciting news, and that is that we are on our journey to powering all of SurveyMonkey with GraphQL Apollo. This is a really big shift for SurveyMonkey, and it's really allowing us to reimagine what our front end can look like. So I wanted to start this talk out with a percentage, 75%. So this is the number that we were actually able to reduce our payload on our test of Apollo GraphQL. This is a huge number, and you can just imagine how this will influence the front end. But I think an even more important number is actually this one, 43%. And this is how much we were able to improve our time till interaction on our test pages. So this directly affects our customers, how they view SurveyMonkey, how they can interact, and how fast they can actually get the answers they need. But it also affects our competitiveness as a company. Think of how many more people will want to come to SurveyMonkey if we have fast pages that can load data like this. GraphQL really enables us to reimagine the front end and think differently about how we fetch data and hydrate our components. So I wanted to talk about 2019. All right. But actually, I really want to talk about 2009, because that's an important year for SurveyMonkey. But it's also an important year for other things, too. So what happened in 2009, just a quick reminder, we elected our first African-American president. Obama got a dog. We had a jet land in the Hudson, but miraculously, everyone was safe. And we discovered water on the moon. So a lot of really cool things happened in 2009. Well, a cool thing happened for SurveyMonkey, too, in that we had a monolithic .NET shop, and we switched it over to Python microservices. But we actually took it in a bit of a different direction. We created microwebs. So we have these individual teams where we had a service, and we had a devoted microweb. And this allowed for teams to work very rapidly and autonomously, but it also created these little silos. So what we saw happening over time is really that they weren't so isolated. They started calling other services, and then our services started calling our services. And this continued and continued until we had webs actually calling webs. And then we got bigger as a company, and we got even bigger, and even bigger, and finally we had 35 different deployable webs. And we had 6 different frameworks. And when I'm talking about frameworks, I'm talking about jQuery, I'm talking about our homegrown backbone that we made, I'm talking about React, Elm, all sorts of things. And oftentimes we were loading all of those on the same page. So that's an interesting place to be, and it really did affect our customers. Our name is SurveyMonkey, so you would think we would have kind of one definition of what a survey meant. But when we actually audited our webs, we realized we had 8 different versions of a model of a survey. So everyone was recreating what a survey was in regards to their particular web. We also had 4 different locations of business logic and authorization. So for a developer, it was unclear where to put this data. And it got to the point where it was affecting productivity, it was affecting how fast we could get our products out, it was affecting the consistency of experience, and it was affecting our happiness as developers. It really was at that point where we were just maintaining, we were just making sure that our apps were in sync with each other and we were able to just get by. So we knew we needed to reimagine the front end, but we also realized that we needed to reimagine the back end as well. And this is a tricky place because essentially we're reimagining SurveyMonkey from a technical perspective. So what do you do? Well, the first decision is to care. As an engineer, we cared. We wanted to see SurveyMonkey be more technical and to have the latest and greatest technologies that actually influence the end user's experience. So it led to the creation of the web platform team, the team that was specifically designed to help out with reimagining the front end in particular. So this was really exciting for SurveyMonkey. We finally got our chance. And there was a mixture of emotions between being ecstatic and, oh no, we really have to think about this and come up with a solution that actually works for SurveyMonkey's needs. So we set up with a couple of guiding principles of what the web platform would do. First, we're in charge of some innovation. We're going to look at the architecture, we're going to look at technologies, frameworks, how it works with CI/CD, what kind of standards we need to have in place as a company to work. And then how do we operationalize this? How do we set up observability, performance, and make a consistent UX experience? And then because we do have 35 different webs, how do we onboard everyone onto this? And how do we form partnerships with these webs and these teams and create tools and guardrails that help them succeed while transitioning over to this new platform? So as a reminder, we had this Python-based team set up of micro webs and microservices, and a ton of them. And we ended up landing on something like this. So a monorepo that had a consolidated set of webs, a design system that was in charge of making sure we had SurveyMonkey branded components that we could share throughout the webs. And our key around this was the Graph API. Now, what this allowed us to do is to separate the back end from the front end, so essentially decouple those two, and allow us to work in parallel, both improving our architecture and infrastructure. And this is really the key, and I think the success of what we've had going on the web platform, is we're no longer dependent on the back end to be done first. We can work in parallel. As they improve, we improve. So that's a really exciting thing that we did. So this monorepo right here, let me just tell you a little bit more about how we came up with this. So we came from a standpoint of having all of these repos in various different locations, and it was really hard to search for code. It was really hard to tell what other teams were doing. Oftentimes, we were working on the same thing as another team, and we just had no idea. And other times, we couldn't share code because we were working in different frameworks. So that was very, very hard to do. If we had a cross-functional project, things weren't released at the same time, making it inconsistent user experience. So having everything centralized in one location made it really easy to search, to do atomic commits, where we could just do one commit across all of the webs and the Graph API. And that worked really, really well for SurveyMonkey. And we also did want to recognize that some people have particular expertise in a certain area of our web, and we wanted to keep that. So we solved this problem by having code owner files, so that we have people who know the code review it and make sure that it is approved by someone with that domain expert knowledge. Okay. So a couple of really cool things that came out of this Monorepo tooling that I just wanted to point out is because we had our Graph API in the same repo, we were able to actually use the schemas to validate our queries. And this was really great in terms of preventing errors from hitting production. So not only could we test it in our actual VS Code, but we could actually test it in CI before it actually hit production. So you guys have heard about the new VS Code extensions that Apollo has released this week, and that is amazing because what used to be kind of limited to Monorepo is now available to everyone. And we can say firsthand that this has been definitely part of why we were so successful in our first initiative, and I would highly recommend every team to use it. So we're really excited about those added features too. Okay, so the next thing that we thought about as a company and as a team was the language and GraphQL framework. Like I said before, we came from a Python shop. Our services are in Python and our webs are in Python. So it made sense to look at potentially having a GraphQL server written in Python. But when we actually evaluated the various different options, we found that the adoption that Apollo had was kind of undeniable. The community, the ecosystem, and the documentation was really something that we needed. So we went with the Apollo ecosystem, and I think it worked out really well for us and was part of the reason we were successful with this initial trial. I also want to point out, too, that with Node, the async nature of it, it works really well with the I/O nature of the GraphQL API. So not only in our GraphQL server, but in our webs, we switched over from Python with a Jinja template and homegrown backbone, sometimes React, sometimes jQuery, sometimes all of those combined, to just React always, Apollo, Node, and our homegrown WDS, which is our design system for shared components. So even though we selected Apollo, we still had a lot of decisions that we could make in terms of constructing our architecture. So Apollo has a couple of different options in terms of fetching data. I think that the recommendation is really to have these separate requests. And you can have these small reusable components with the data encapsulated. And when you have these separate requests, the data comes back just in the order that it's received, and it shows up on the page as you get it back. And this is really nice, but there are some issues. It's not as performant with HTTP2, and you can potentially have some overhead on your APIs if you don't have caching set up. For us, this became kind of an issue for us because we are not on HTTP2, so we were sending a lot of requests, and because we don't have multiplexing that HTTP2 offers, we were seeing some performance issues. So we went with batching, and so we have those small reusable components that you can just drop in place on the pages with the data encapsulated. And that's nice, but it's only as fast as your slowest query on the page. So that's definitely a downside. You also have the option to use fragments, and definitely in areas that make sense for sure. But the reason I point this out is because when you are kind of rolling out a new architecture, you're going to run into issues where you can't do what's best. And I think this is a case where we can't do it because we don't have HTTP2, and it affects performance. And the one thing that I want to show and highlight about Apollo is that that's OK, because we can incrementally improve. And Apollo kind of has offered this really smooth transition to just incrementally improve and adopt GraphQL as your organization improves their infrastructure. So here you have the batching, which we have. And when we switch over to HTTP2, it's a 2-line change. And that's really nice because we don't feel like we're trapped in a corner. We didn't make a wrong decision that's going to be affecting us for years ahead. We know that there's a clear path to get to where we want to be. And that's really cool. And I think it says a lot about the Apollo team for having that forethought to think about users and how they might have to incrementally adapt their best practices. And for us, we just we feel good knowing that we didn't mess up. You know, we're going to be okay. We're going to get better, and that Apollo has thought about how we can transition once our infrastructure improves. Another thing that I want to point out about Apollo, and one of the reasons we chose to go with it, was that it encouraged these UX state. It really has the end user as the heart of the decisions. So this is their render prop for a query, and you can see here that it returns an error and loading in the data, which is your normal state. So if there's an error, we throw it and we catch it with an error boundary, get some of that extra data around what happened, and show an error card. And then if it's loading, we show a skeleton view. And for the end user, this is really great because they have that immediate response of what's happening in the page, and they know that they've gotten an error or it's just loading. And so this is what it looks like when you actually render it. We have those really nice skeletons, and then the data comes in and renders. Okay, so I want to talk about how this affects an organization when you implement GraphQL, because there was a lot of things we knew it was going to improve our end user, and we knew it was going to improve our developers, but there was a lot of other people that it helped out as well. So let's just quickly talk about the user. They get a performance gain, they get consistent UX experience, more emphasis on various states, so that's great. For the developer, we saw an improvement in velocity because we weren't rewriting all this code and we could share more. We saw that we could focus on more interesting problems and not have to recreate the wheel. For the designer, it was great because we could have those conversations between the product engineers and designers about the various different states and set them up, and it was easier for us to implement them because we didn't have to recreate it all the time. We were working with one framework. And for the product manager, this is something we didn't really expect. It provided them more consistent timelines of how long it would take us to actually complete a project. So this is really cool. And they were able to kind of know that when we were forming our schemas, we were thinking about the end user and they're based on the experience. So that was a really nice find that we had. Just to go in this a little bit more in depth, we had performance gains, that consistent user experience, a cohesive UX state, and we added improved responsiveness and web accessibility with our WDS library. For engineering, we had code visibility sharing, this ease of cross-functional changes. The Apollo tools are amazing for discoverability. Those reusable components with encapsulated data just made it super simple to take, for instance, a upgrade modal and place it somewhere else and not have to worry about the data that it was consuming. Local development, as you saw from our own linting that we had and the new stuff that Apollo has just released, it just constantly improving and raising the bar on what it's like to develop. And then for our product managers, we saw improved feature velocity. We added built-in performance support, and we were able to standardize metrics and have it really easy to track how features were doing in production. And we reduced the amount of resources that were needed. We didn't have to do these complex aggregations that we were previously doing with all of the APIs coming in at once. More consistent data coming in and less bugs. And this increased focus on production, which just by the nature of Apollo, always keeping that kind of the schemas close to the actual product. All right, so I just wanted to let everyone know that we're going live this month, so we're super excited. We've decked out SurveyMonkey in the latest and greatest, and we're super excited to be here and be a part of this community. I also want to let everyone know that we're hiring. So if you're interested in complex problems, you like Apollo, you like GraphQL, come talk to us. Thank you guys.